This is a production of Cornell University.
So today I would like to talk to you about gourmet mushrooms in the context of the agroforestry system called forest farming. Forest farming, agroforestry is probably something you've heard of, but maybe not forest farming. Agroforestry has to do with cultivating trees and crops together for social, environmental, and economic reasons. Forest farming is just one particular practice out of a total of 5 temperate forest farming practices. They include alley cropping, riparian buffers, silvopasture, and windmills. And of course, forest farming. That's what I'm going to be talking about. It's quite appropriate for New York State. Over 65% of the land area of New York State is forested, and about 80% of that is privately owned forest land. So there's a lot of interest amongst woodlot and forest owners in how they can put their forest to work, other than just perhaps growing timber. Now we grow, as I say, non-timber forest crops. They're quite diverse. These are just some examples of the non-timber forest crops that we grow here at the McDaniels Nutgrove, which is our forest farming teaching site on campus. We grow medicinals like American ginseng, golden seal, mushrooms, of course, a couple of different kinds. Nuts, after all, the McDaniels Nutgrove is a good place to grow walnuts and hickory nuts. And various fruit crops, including pawpaws, which are just fruiting this year. And we've grown some other fruit crops, berry crops, and so forth. Another one is we take advantage of the forest shade to grow shade-loving ornamental perennials. We've grown things like hostas and ferns, and more recently we're trying to grow lady slipper orchids, cypripedias, beautiful forest orchids, and we figure if we grow them in the forest deliberately, somebody's going to make a lot of money. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these aspects of our forest farming program. Research, which we conduct primarily at the Arnott Forest. Teaching, as I mentioned, we have a course called Practicum in Forest Farming down here at the McDaniels Nutgrove, which is on the south edge of campus, just beyond the orchard. And outreach extension. We're cooperating with a number of different extension educators in a couple of different counties, and we have a 3-year SARE grant that's going on right now, but I'd like to mention a little later. So, you might ask the question, why grow mushrooms, especially when you look at the price tag on this American ginseng. $200 to $300 a pound dry weight when you cultivate it in the forest, even more expensive to collect it from the wild. So, when you just look at the dollar figures, the value of the crop, why would you ever bother to grow mushrooms at $12 to $16 a pound when you could grow ginseng? There's some good reasons, actually. It takes, in the case of ginseng, 8 or more years before it's of mature size ready to harvest. In the case of shiitake mushrooms, once you inoculate a log, it's ready to produce mushrooms in about 1 year, and it's going to continue to produce mushrooms for 3, 4, even 5 years. At 1 to 2 pounds of mushrooms a year, times 5 years, at $16 a pound, that's a fair amount of money for that log. When you grow ginseng, it takes 7 years. Once you harvest it, there's nothing left. There's nothing to regenerate from. So you don't get multiple years, you get a single year. And so you can see that there's certain economic advantages to growing mushrooms in the forest. When someone asks me, what should I grow, they're often interested in ginseng, and I try to tell them, no, if you're going to grow ginseng, that's fine, but you maybe start out with shiitake mushrooms at the same time, so you don't have to wait 8 years to discover your poach. So let's talk more about the shiitake mushroom. It is in the genus Lentinula edoides. It's native to China, Korea, and Japan. The shi in shiitake refers to the she tree, which is Castaneopsis cuspidata. It's in the Fagaceae family, so it's close relative of our oaks and beech. And we'll talk about using those as mushroom substrate in a little while. It's a basidiomycete fungus, and it's a saprophyte. It feeds on or it digests dead organic matter. That is to say, it is not a mycorrhizal fungus, and it is not a parasite or pathogen. So let me go through the production cycle for this fungus. Maybe as I do, could ask Brian to bring that log back here, if you would, please. Brian Sobel is my graduate student working on mushrooms. So the process starts with, usually in the springtime, cutting down a live tree. You can't be a tree hugger. You have to be ready to cut down live trees. And you cut those trees into 3-foot lengths. We call these bolts. And so you take those bolts and you drill holes in them using a high-speed angle grinder is the best way to do it. So these are students in my class this fall drilling holes in Ostraya logs. Once you drill the hole about 7/16 of diameter, 1.25 deep, you take spawn, which is, you see this plastic bag here is filled with sawdust substrate, and the mycelium of the fungus has been allowed to grow and colonize that sawdust substrate. And this tool right here, you really need, okay, this guy is holding an inoculation tool. You pick up some spawn there, sawdust, and put it there and push it into the hole. So you drill about 30 holes, and you've got 30 slugs of inoculum. The next step is to paint them off with molten wax, cheese wax, and then you're ready to take them to the laying yard where they incubate for about a year. Now, a laying yard is, of course, it's a place where you lay down your logs, but it's a little bit more than that too. A good laying yard has the characteristics of a very dense canopy for shade. It's best if you have a conifer canopy. Hemlock is really the best as you could do. Deciduous canopies in the wintertime, the leaves fall off and light can come through, and there can be warm temperatures and logs drying out. The log can dry out during the wintertime, so a evergreen canopy is best. Level surface is, most people try to use a level surface. And then there are several different stacking systems. This is a low A-frame type system. We use this in a lot of our experimental designs. And for one thing, it's very easy to harvest mushrooms as they produce there. This is a much more common system called a rick stack, and it is very concentrated. There are a lot of mushrooms, a lot of logs for a given area of the ground, a small footprint. But you can imagine once this starts producing mushrooms, it's going to be very difficult to pick those mushrooms. Like if it's down there on the bottom row, you're going to have to spend the whole day lifting the other logs off. That's not generally what you do. Now, I said most laying yards are on level ground, but sometimes a grower doesn't have much level ground. In Japan, for example, we had a student from the forest farming class go to Japan and work on a shiitake farm for 4 months. And he brought back this hillside stacking system. It's really elegant, really complicated to put together, but it stands by itself on very steep slopes. And it's relatively easy to harvest from. If you took the rick stack and put it on the steep slope, it would just roll downhill. Okay, so you have to incubate the log for about a year, and when you're ready to flush it, produce a flush of mushrooms, you take the log that's well colonized and you put it in a tank of water, cold water, for about 24 hours. And that shocks it, as we say. Physiologically, you don't really understand what's happening, but at any rate, within a week to 7 days, the log will start producing mushrooms very consistently. If you're a mushroom farmer like Steve Gabriel or Steve Sirik, who are here in the audience, they might want to go to market, let's say the farmer's market on Saturday. They can rely on soaking the logs the previous Thursday, 10 days later, they would be live without these mushrooms and take to market. If you let them fruit naturally, they'll just come sort of as they will, here and there. They won't be a consistent flush. Once you're taking them out of the tank, you lean them up against something or other, and you pick them very, very easily, more easily than any of those other systems. And then you put it back on the stack and let it rest, as they say, for 6 to 8 weeks, and then you can flush it again. So, and you can keep doing that, 2 flushes or so each year for 3 to 5 years. So, I want to talk about our research program. Shiitake has been grown in North America since the early 80s, and a lot is known about cultivation of shiitake. There's no shortage of booklets and pamphlets and websites to tell you how to do it. But most of that production is in the south, southeast, and up the upper Midwest. There's relatively little shiitake production here in the Northeast. And so our rationale has been that what we want to do is develop the optimal approaches for northeastern conditions. Some of the variation regionally would be substrate tree species. You have a lot of sweet gum in the south, and that's one of the favorite species, but we don't have much or any sweet gum up here. So finding the appropriate tree species is something to look into. Moisture management has to do with the logs drying out. If the logs dry out too much in the sun or whatever, they're going to stop producing. It's going to kill the fungus. Seasonal considerations. When do we do the cutting and inoculation? And finally, fungal species. We're talking so far about shiitake, but there are some other species that are candidates, such as the lion's mane that I'll be talking about. So when it comes to choosing appropriate substrate trees, you often see, and much of the literature says that the oaks, red oak, white oak, are the best trees to use. But consider the fact that some woodlot owners, forest owners, don't have oak or don't want to cut it because it's a valuable lumber species. What can they do? There are a lot of other hardwoods in the Northeast that are candidate species, and we set out to determine which ones are most effective, to see if any of them would stand up to oak as a sort of gold standard. So the ones that are with the asterisks are ones that we have tested in our program. Here's one of the tests that we run a couple of years ago. We're looking at 4 species here. Musclewood is Carpinus virginiana. Red oak hawthorn bean is Ostrea. Carpinus caroliniana and Ostrea virginiana. And sugar maple. So we're testing all 4 of these trees. There they are up there. And this guy here is Carpinus, called musclewood. And you can tell it's kind of ripply, sort of like the muscles in my arm. I wish. And so you can see after this is the sum of 2 years data, and you see that the red oak didn't do any better than the hawthorn bean or the sugar maple. What did the best in this trial was the musclewood over there, the Carpinus. Significantly more fresh weight mushrooms produced than the other species. So that sort of belies the red oak supposition. Here's an experimental design that tested tree substrate species, but some other variables as well. This is basically a 3x4x2 complete factorial arrangement of treatments. We're looking at 3 different fungal species. Those are shiitake, oyster mushrooms, and lion's mane mushroom. I'll tell you why I crossed them out. But in addition to that, we're looking at 4 different tree species: red oak, aspen, beech, and red maple, pretty common around here. And then the 2 waxing treatments. What I mean here is we're getting at the question of moisture management. How can we, what is the response to the log to drying out? How far can it go before mushroom production is decreased? So what we've done here to basically test the hypothesis that the moisture content of the log will be related to or cause decreased mushroom production. To test that hypothesis, we have waxed the log poles, as I indicated. You always do that to keep moisture in and contaminants out. But we've also, in half of the logs in each of these treatments, we wax the base of the log. In other words, you have a pot of hot molten wax, and you dip the end of the log in there and turn it over to the other end. And the idea is, can we retard moisture loss? So here, basically, then we're testing substrate, tree species, moisture management, and fungal species. Now, the reason I crossed out the oyster mushroom and the lion's mane is because in this experiment they tanked. They produced almost no mushrooms at all. We've repeated this with some other approaches, and I've come to the conclusion: don't try to grow oyster mushrooms on wood. Solid wood. It just doesn't work out very well. Oyster mushroom is much better grown on sawdust, straw, coffee grounds, or other more easily digested substrates. And the lion's mane, using this bolt system, the 3-foot log, just doesn't produce much on those logs at all. So here you see the results in terms of the different species and their effect on mushroom fresh weight over 4 different seasons. Started the experiment in 2006, got a few mushrooms in 2007, more in 2008, and 2009 was down again. We figured, we decided this was such low production in 2009, these logs were pretty well spent. But we thought, well, just hang on to them, and next summer we'll soak them in water. We'll flush them to see if they had anything in them at all. And sure enough, that soaking resulted in a lot of mushroom production for that year.
And why do you think you have such differences from year to year?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, this year they were just getting off the ground. Good, often on the second year you really get a good flush, and I thought this was just the substrate was being exhausted, but it wasn't, because you had a flush there. Can't really tell you why. Perhaps the temperature, the dryness of the season, I'm not sure. But at any rate, you see here that the beech, in 2010, the beech outperformed the other 3 species. And when you look at the total of all 4 years, once again, the beech produced significantly more mushroom fresh weight than either the red oak or the red maple. And consistently, all years, the aspen did very, very poorly. I wouldn't recommend that as a substrate at all. We've seen that consistently. Now, as far as the moisture aspects of this experiment are concerned, the water relations, if you will, we set out to monitor the moisture status of the log moisture content, LMC, and using 2 different methods that are used in production more or less commonly. There's the Koki method. By Koki, I mean you use your chainsaw to cut off a 1-inch thick section of log, and you just use the standard equation for moisture content. The fresh weight of that cookie, you put it in the drying oven, take the dry weight. The difference between the 2 divided by the fresh weight is the log moisture content as a percentage or decimal fraction. And you can't go wrong here. I mean, as long as your balance isn't acting up, you can get a fresh weight, dry weight, and you know what you're doing. You're not going to have any source of variation, really. There's another approach that's sometimes used, and the reason is, if you cut off a cookie every year for 5 years, you've lost a lot of log. You've lost a lot of mushrooms, or some mushrooms anyway. This method, called the calculated oven dry weight method, CODW, is a way to estimate that log moisture content without destroying that section of the log. What it involves is you start out at time 0, and you cut that 1 cookie, and you do the fresh weight, dry weight thing, and you calculate log moisture content like this. and then you multiply that log moisture content by the fresh weight of the log. So at the same time you've cut the cookie, you've taken the fresh weight of that log. You did dry it out, just the fresh weight. Multiply the log moisture content on the fresh weight, and you get the amount of water in the log. And then subtract that amount of water from the fresh weight of the log, and that leaves you with an estimate of dry weight, calculated of dry weight. So that subsequently, after 6 months, after a year or two, you could simply weigh that log fresh without cutting it or cooking, and use this calculated of dry weight, which generally assumes that it's a constant throughout the experiment. Subtract that calculated of dry weight from the fresh weight that you've just taken and divide by the fresh weight to come up with an estimated log moisture content. This is what the results look like using those two methods. This is the cookie method, which is pretty much foolproof, as I said. The CODW method is an estimate, and it's generally assumed, at least early in the log's life, that the dry weight of the log doesn't change. Moisture may be driven off so that the log loses weight, but the dry weight stay constant. But of course that isn't true. As the log ages, the fungus is digesting the log, and it's generating CO2. Dry weight is lost. What was I guess not too surprising was that using the estimate, CODW, the moisture content of all 4 species seemed to decrease pretty rapidly. But we knew things were a little bit funny when the moisture content dropped below 25%. That's considered the lethal point. The moisture content at which the fungus can no longer survive and the log is effectively dead. Except that our logs did not stop producing mushrooms at the 25% moisture content. When you look at the actual moisture content by the cookie method, we were somewhat surprised to see that there was very little loss of moisture over time, and that all 4 species behaved pretty much the same. Now that may seem counterintuitive, but consider it this way. The log moisture evaporates. You have it out in the sun or under any conditions, water is going to evaporate from the log, causing a decrease in weight. And furthermore, when you harvest mushrooms, a pound of mushrooms has 7/10 of a pound of water in it. So you're losing moisture every time you remove mushrooms from that pile. And when you have a couple of factors that are adding water to the log, rainfall, of course, some of it's absorbed to increase the moisture content. Respiration is a big one. When you look at aerobic respiration, carbohydrate is broken down into equal parts CO2 and water, mole per mole. And a lot of the weight of that original carbohydrate produces moisture, which is within the log. So you're sort of recharging the log with moisture. There are other factors. When the respiration is producing CO2, which is being lost, and that's dry weight blowing away. So all things considered, our results are consistent with the fact that the logs do not lose much moisture content as long as they're treated right, kept in the shade, kept out of the wind, and not allowed to lose a lot of moisture. Another factor that we mentioned here was seasonal considerations, and this was actually a substrate and tree species experiment too. We worked with 2 different species here, the red oak and the beech. 2 of the logs that we had in that previous experiment, basically it turned out the same way. The beech produced significantly more mushroom fresh weight than the red oak did. So that difference was significant. The main effects concerning season were significant, but there was no interaction, so we can look at these 2 independently. And when you do that, look at the different seasons, we were surprised. We figured, the standard course of action is to take your logs and inoculate them in the spring. But those were no different than the winter inoculation that was cut in February, inoculated in February. These were prepared in spring and early June. The summer inoculation was in July, and the fall inoculation was in October. Much to our surprise, the fall inoculation produced significantly more mushrooms than the winter or the summer inoculations. So when you think about this in terms of the mushroom farmer, usually say spring or winter is the best time to do it, but the farmer's pretty busy in the spring and may not be an opportune time to do those activities in the woods. So this would suggest that other times of year, winter and spring would be more or less comparable to the winter and summer, more or less comparable to the spring, and fall was significantly more than the winter and summer times. Okay, so we come back to fungal species, and I sort of mixed this one, the oyster mushrooms. We just can't get it to grow in solid wood. But in addition to shiitake, we've been working with lion's mane mushroom. Really excited about this. Jean Grace, my graduate student, former graduate student, started working with lion's mane, and it sort of evolved from there. The lion's mane is it's got a lot of common names, but lion's mane is as good as any. It's a Hericium species. There are several different species. We work with Hericium arenaceus, sort of puffball-like structure, and with Hericium maritimum. This is one of the logs that we have inoculated. We use a totem system. Instead of those 3-foot long, 8-inch diameter logs that we use for shiitake, we take a beech tree in this case and cut off a section that is about 12 inches in diameter, 1 foot long. And then we place a dollop of spawn, sawdust spawn, on the bottom. Place the first section, a second dollop between the first and second, and another dollop on top, covered with a bag. And we got fantastic production of lion's mane. This particular log has about 2 pounds of mushrooms coming off it. It's very impressive. Of course, the season is much condensed compared to shiitake, but there have been very few attempts to cultivate lion's mane in a forest farming situation, and we think it has a lot of potential as possibly a commercial crop. It's considered a real gourmet item by wild collectors and so forth. So can we develop to the point where it may be a commercial crop? Well, Jim Artersky is an extension educator in Ontario County, and he has worked with us on one of our hatch projects and done a survey, a market survey of forest mushrooms. He interviewed about 23 or 25 different restaurant chefs, the high-end guys who really knew what they were doing, and asked them which kinds of mushrooms are they familiar with, and do they purchase. And of course, portobello and white button mushroom came out on top. Notice that shiitake is 4th, it's not bad. But you come, for lion's mane, you come all the way down the scale to the last of the culprit. Lion's mane is next to the last. Almost nobody knows about it, and that means almost nobody buys it. So we have a sort of uphill battle in terms of marketing that. I really think there's potential to do that, because people who eat shiitake are kind of adventurous, I guess. See if we can get them to eat lion's mane. What we've done experimentally, what Gene started out to do, was we obtained a commercial isolate from one of the mushroom supply companies. There are very few commercial isolates in the United States. So we got that commercial isolate, and then Gene and Carly Whitaker collected isolates from the wild in this particular region. So we have wild isolates. In other words, you take one of the sporocarps like this, take a fresh section under sterile conditions, and plate it out on potato dextrose auger, and then use that to inoculate grain spawn, sterile grain spawn. Mycelium colonizes the grain, and then transfer some of that into the sawdust bag, and it permeates the bag. And what Gene did was grow it in these bags, poking holes in the side. That mushroom movie that you saw if you came in early, that was a Hericium mushroom developing over about a 4-day period. Kent Loeffler did that. But at any rate, we've also then taken this sawdust inoculant and used it in that totem system, the two sections that I described earlier. Here's the totem being inoculated. There's the adult spawn right there. It takes about 18 months to be found. That's 6 months longer than it takes to get your shiitake, but it's pretty good. This is data for 3 successive years. First 2 years there wasn't much production at all, and then last year, 2010, we got a big boost in production. You can see that the HE isolates are the ones that Gene and Carl got locally. The FFP3 is the commercial isolate. And outdoors in our totem system, the collected wild isolates, HE5 and HE3, outperform the commercial isolate.
Ken, question. So when you're isolating the local strains, does it make a difference? Say if you isolated them from beech, and then you try to grow them on aspen or red oak or whatever, is there a source influence on how well the strain will do when you re-inoculate it?
We haven't gone that far. As you can see, this experiment was entirely beech.
They're all,
And I think they were all isolated from beech. We now have totems established on several different tree species substrates. So perhaps we can answer that question later on. These are some of the beauties that we harvest off of those things. And here is the data that comes from this year, 2011. You can see the different isolates, the commercial FF isolate, and HE3, 4, and 5 in springtime and in the fall, same isolates. We're rather surprised to see this year that there was a flush of lion's mane mushrooms by the commercial isolate in the spring. It was early June. But none of the other local isolates produced anything in the spring. However, in the fall, the situation was quite different. We got very little production from the commercial isolate, but vastly more production from the wild collected isolates around here. This is hot off the press, and I haven't even had a chance to run the statistics, but it's pretty obvious that we have some substantial differences between here and there, at least. We looked at this both with respect to the average mushroom production per totem, all the totems, even the ones that didn't produce anything, or average mushroom production only from the totems that produce mushrooms. And the same thing is apparent either way. We're very encouraged by this, and we'll take it further. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about our outreach extensions, because I think it's a very important part of it. Can we take this to the landowners, the forest owners, and farmers? And this is one of the media that we've developed for a SARE project. We got that's the 3-year SARE project we got the year before last. It's a collaboration between Cornell, I'm the PI, and Alan Matthews is the co-PI from University of Vermont. He is a farm economist specialist, and so he's well equipped to help us look at the commercial aspects of this. Cultivation of shiitake mushrooms is an agroforestry product for the Northeast. I should say Northeast, not the... Basically, this project is intended to train forest owners to become commercial shiitake producers, not backyard shiitake producers. So a lot of those, and we've held workshops many times all over the place to train folks in how to drill the holes and put the nut of them in and grade the log. But we want to go well beyond that in case of this 3-year project. We started out with 2 introductory workshops at the beginning workshop, just teaching those basic production things, and then an advanced workshop where the attendees were given instruction in forest management, in site selection, in the marketing and commercial aspects, enterprise aspects, all 3 of those. They were attending both Vermont and here in New York. We had 158 attendees. Then we had an advanced workshop, as I say. 105 people came to that. And out of those, we asked people to apply to continue with the project. They had to develop a fairly elaborate plan for how they were going to grow these mushrooms. And we selected these applications, came up with 22 people who were going to continue with the project. That was 2010. What they've done in the spring of this year is they've inoculated 100 logs of their own logs. We didn't give them the logs, so they have to have a source to begin with. We did supply the spawn this year, and so each of those 22 people has inoculated 100 logs on their own property. We sent out a member of our staff for a site visit each time they were doing the inoculations. And we're able to observe and record what they were doing, as well as helping them out. So we're keeping information about what they're doing, but they're also doing that themselves. To get involved in this project, they have agreed to keep very detailed records of their labor, their expenses, and their eventual income. The idea is by the end of next year, next summer, they should have pretty good production statistics, but also they're going to sell what they produce. We'll have data on all those activities. The idea is by the end of next year, we'll have harvest and sales data. We plan in the fall to have a regional Chicago Forest cultivated mushroom conference, and out of that, we intend to develop the best management practices. You can see here the distribution of the farmers that we're dealing with in this project. They're quite dispersed. They span over 7 different states, mainly Vermont and New York. But there are quite a few people. It's not just a local project, it's a regional. As I say, record keeping has been an important part of this project. Not only by us, but by them. They've been very good about this. We're asking them what tree species did they use, when did they fell the trees for inoculation, when did they inoculate, and then they're tracking their monitoring labor inputs, and also looking at economic, social, and demographic factors involved. And this is typical. This is for an annual report that we're putting together. You can see the distribution of how people undertook these tasks. They were doing the logging as early as late February, and some people were logging as late as April. The inoculation came later, peaked in late April. So we're able to tell when people are active. And we don't just want everyone to do it our way. That's not at all what this is about. We know there's going to be farmer by farmer variation. And we just want to give good advice and then document how they're doing it. We expect to be quite a lot of variation. Here's some information on the average percentage of time worked by different individuals. The owner, vastly greater percentage than the others, and volunteers or friends, well, a significant amount of labor. And we're also looking at the distribution of labor in terms of various activities, laying yard maintenance, cutting and felling the trees, and inoculating the logs. We expect this to change from year to year, but we have an increasingly good handle on what's happening now. And this is has to do with expenses. Bridget is a woman who works with us at the University of Vermont. I don't know how she did that graphic.
There's a program.
Oh, good. So we're breaking it down into durable equipment expenses and expendable equipment expenses. And by the time it's all over, I really think we're going to have a better picture of how this can work than really anyone else. There are individual publications dealing with a single operation here, there. But this is the only attempt, I think, to look at the kind of variation that occurs from farm to farm that will allow us to make recommendations for the best management practices.
This looks like it's all production end, not the marketing end. Just look at
Right.
the itemization.
None of these folks have done any marketing yet, but we presume they will next year. So that's what's kind of.
There's the organic certification fee. How many of these farmers were organic certified?
None of them when they got started because they hadn't applied, but it is really rather simple because all you have to do is fill out the paperwork. Nobody does anything non-organic with Shiitake mushroom production, so it's pretty easy to get certified. And the supplier that provided the spawn for us out in Wisconsin, they are already certified. Their spawn is certified organic, so you're off to a good start there. This just shows you the website. This is another extension output that we've had over the several years. We started this website with the Hatch project that preceded this Sarah project. But this is reflective of the Sarah project. There is a little mushroom. I mean, there's a map you can bring up. It's a Google map on our website. It shows this little mushroom for everybody that's involved in the project, but also established farmers like Steve here. And what you do is you run your mouse over one of those mushrooms, and a little window pops up, and it says Hawk Meadow Farm, which is Steve's farm locally, the address and some comments about what's going on there. So this is a tool, I think, that producers can use. The public can access this database, if you will, and find out where and how they can purchase mushrooms. I just want to acknowledge a couple of people here. I've mentioned Steve Sarek and Steve Gabriel. I don't have pictures of you guys, so I'm sorry. But these are folks that have worked with the project for the last several years. Rachel Brinkman, of course, lives in Boston now, and she doesn't commute back here. So she was very involved in the project for 3 years, excellent technician. Tim Putsky is our technician currently. We share between Neil Matson and myself. Tim does really good. He works so hard that he appeared to be asleep with this picture. Is Tim available? Anyway, these are some other people. Rachel, this is Jean Grace that I was telling you about. Her head is not really that flat. But Brian, so Carl Whitaker is expert in wild mushrooms. This is Abdul Sarime, who is a visiting scholar from Burkina Faso. Another person I left out was Kathy Hodge. She's an excellent advisor to the project. She's over there. And then Dwayne was our summer intern. Every year in our program we have a summer Agroforestry intern. She was one this year. And that is Alyssa DeVillers. She has been working for me for about 2 years. All these guys do a great job. They're all hanging on to a piece of lines over there. So I guess I'll ask if there are any questions.
When you dipped the ends of the logs in wax, did you find that affected the moisture content?
No. Basically, you saw that straight, flat line and all the trees were the same. There was no difference in moisture content, regardless of tree.
So with all the beech trees dying and beech bark decline, it would be tempting to cut trees that are dead or dying. Does it matter? Do you need to harvest a fresh, living, healthy tree in order to use it?
We have that experiment in progress, basically. We have some 3-year-old beech trucks, some of which have beech bark disease and some don't. People have been asking that all over the place.
Yeah.
We want to try that with the bulb system as well.
You were saying that sort of the standard was level ground, but it sounds like moisture content is a big deal. I was wondering why you wouldn't use north slopes or areas that would just naturally not dry out.
No matter how you cut it, it's going to be more difficult to work with these logs on a slope. And I think that's why most people stick to level ground. But as I say, we have introduced this Japanese stacking method. I only know of one grower who's using it. It's us and him, and we hope it will catch on. Because it's from Japan. There's a lot of mushroom-related technology in Japan. them. But it seems like it can be a useful alternative.
We want more hemlock on our facing slopes too.
Any downsides of temperature, cooler or cold?
We've never seen, I don't know whether Steve or Steve have any experience about the effect of temperature on mushroom production.
I actually just have a forcing in the creek right now, and what I do is I look at the 10-day forecast. As long as I have temperatures that look like they're going to be favorable. I've never forced shiitakes this late in the year, but as long as, yes. And there was one warm January where some of the logs started popping out. So if the temperatures are right.
What's the right temperature?
If the average temperature, there's cold weather varieties of shiitake as well as, so I use mostly wide range, which are the ones that respond to the forcing. And as long as the average temperature for 10 days is roughly 50 degrees, you'll get a flushing response.
The other thing about temperature is we've never seen any winter even when the temperatures are extremely low. There's folks who grow shiitake in northern Wisconsin. The best thing you could do in the winter is have it covered by snow, but we don't have that kind of snow here in Wisconsin.
What do you do with lion's mane?
Marty?
Has anybody tried under artificial shade?
Yes,
Shade
definitely.
And it works?
When we have a deciduous canopy like we do it in Genus, we just take greenhouse shade cloth and lay it right over the piles. And it works. I think it's not as good as a natural canopy. Besides, that shade cloth is black and it looks I didn't mention it, but there is shiitake production indoors under very intensive conditions. The same place that grows unbelievable numbers of the white button mushrooms, Phillips mushroom in Kennett Square, produces some shiitake as well. They use that plastic bag culture system, and we maintain, and I think it's a good marketing approach, that log-grown shiitake is a better product. If you've ever seen a shiitake at Wegmans, it looks like shoe leather, and our stuff is just beautiful. You can see it here. People recognize its value and are willing to pay $16 a pound as contrasted to 7 or 8 at Wegmans.
When you did the experiment with the wild birds that strains and commercial wet strains, when was that log inoculated?
It was inoculated in 2000, 2009.
I'm wondering more like in the season, if
Oh.
it's spring, that's commercial and
We use the conventional isn't inoculated in the spring. We don't have to do it.
What do chefs do with lion's mane? How do you eat it? How's it cooked?
Kathy taught me to slice it up into narrow sections and grill it in olive oil until it's nice and brown, and salt and everything. A lot of people put them in stews and soups and things like that, sort of like little cauliflower pieces.
So it has a more dense texture, right, than, say, shiitake?
No, I wouldn't say so. Shiitake's kind of medium, and I got a piece of it here. In fact, I actually do have a piece of it here, and I forgot. If anyone wants to take a look at this, that log, I'll put them on the back shelf in the dispersed.
We're supposed to say, warn everybody, our lab worker Alyssa thinks that she has skin sensitivity to it. She's a very sensitive woman, so I don't know. Yeah, your own caution.
As a matter of fact, we know this is a case with shiitake. Some people have a contact dermatitis. Not very many, I think, and it's not like deadly or anything. But that applies to fresh shiitake, uncooked shiitake. And apparently it may apply to uncooked ricin as well. Because Alyssa does eat cooked lion's mane. It's just fresh. That's a problem.
how consistent are the sources of the
Except when we're trying to test out our local strains, we never make spawn on our own because it's a pretty complicated process to do the laminar flow with the new lateral. The 5 or 6 commercial lawn producers in the United States produce an excellent product at very low price. It just isn't worth it. A bag like this, they will inoculate 20 to 30 logs, costs $20. So it's less than $1 a month. And it's very high quality. Any other questions?
What would happen if you put the logs laying on the ground? They get contaminated, but would it decrease the crop?
We discourage it. You don't have any aeration under there, but you're going to potentially pick up fungal contaminants. In the first experiment,
So you've tried it?
well, no, we haven't laid them straight on the ground, but you saw those low A-frames that just a pipe like this and then the logs like that. The first time the butt of the log was in the dirt.
Right, but when you walk through the woods, the wettest logs are the ones laying on the ground.
Yeah. But moisture isn't a particular problem. It's
It's just the water threshold.
so you should try it. Yes.
How much are the logs decomposed after 5 years? Because that 5 years is typically when the production drops off.
I
And
want-
would you re-inoculate the same logs, or are those logs pretty getting sort of mushy?
They are. I went to a friend of mine in Socrates who grows mushroom on oak. And here's a 5-year-old log. I could put my fist just enough with cardboard. Yes, sir, in the back.
Do you have a hypothesis about what it is about the different types of wood that makes it a better substrate?
We're curious about that. One thing that I looked at was C to N ratio, and they don't differ substantially. They have something to do with their anatomical structure. We know that the fungus moves rapidly through the log vertically through xylem vessels and migrates very slowly laterally. But it could be chemical, it could be anatomical, it could be other colors. Don't know. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.